Welcome to Verge News, where we bring you the latest updates on immigration policies and their impact on communities. I'm Olivia, your host for today, and we're diving into a recent U.S. District Court ruling that temporarily blocks ICE arrests at certain places of worship. Joining me is my co-host, Andrew. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Olivia. This is such an important and complex topic, so I'm glad we're covering it today. There's a lot to unpack here. Judge Theodore D. Chuang's decision has already stirred significant debate. Let's get into it.
Absolutely. So on February 24, 2025, Judge Chuang issued a ruling that prevents Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, from carrying out arrests near worship sites for Quaker congregations, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and a Sikh temple. This decision comes after the Department of Homeland Security recently removed protections for so-called sensitive locations like houses of worship. Andrew, can you give us some background on that policy shift?
Of course. In January 2025, the Department of Homeland Security, under President Trump's administration, made a controversial decision to lift long-standing restrictions on immigration enforcement at sensitive locations. These included schools, hospitals, and worship sites. The administration argued that those protections could create safe havens for dangerous individuals avoiding legal consequences. A DHS spokesperson even said, "Criminals will no longer be able to hide in America's schools and churches to avoid arrest."
Right, and that argument clearly set off alarms for many faith leaders. They pushed back hard, citing concerns about religious freedom and the chilling effect this policy could have on congregants, particularly undocumented immigrants. Some leaders, like Reverend Sean Rowe of the Episcopal Church, have openly said, "We cannot worship freely if some of us are living in fear."
Exactly. In fact, 27 religious groups filed a lawsuit, arguing that the DHS policy undermined their faith practices and their ability to serve vulnerable immigrant populations. Many places of worship provide critical support, things like food programs, shelters, and legal aid to undocumented communities. Losing the perception of sanctuary could potentially disrupt all of that.
It really highlights how intertwined religious and immigrant communities are. And this isn't just hypothetical. There have been reports of diminished attendance at services and programs as people fear stepping into public spaces. Reverend Carlos Malave summed it up by saying, "There is deep-seated fear and distrust of our government. People fear going to the store. They are avoiding going to church."
Those concerns seem to resonate with Judge Chuang. His ruling provides temporary relief for the specific religious groups involved in the lawsuit but doesn't grant nationwide protections. This injunction essentially acts as a pause to IC operations near those designated places of worship.
Right, but it's also worth noting that the Trump administration and the Department of Justice have pushed back on the ruling. The DOJ argued that fears about harm were speculative and pointed out that immigration enforcement in worship spaces has happened with limitations for decades. The administration defended the policy as granting agents greater discretion while maintaining existing legal norms.
It's a really tricky balance. The legal arguments touch on big issues like religious freedom versus federal enforcement powers. And while this ruling is limited, it could set the stage for broader legal challenges. Some analysts even think it could make its way to the Supreme Court.
That's definitely a possibility. Advocates are also watching to see if this inspires legislative action to codify protections for sensitive locations like worship sites into law. Faith leaders seem to be hoping for something more permanent to ensure that no one has to choose between safety and practicing their religion.
And regardless of where you stand on this issue, it really forces us to reflect on the role of religious institutions in immigrant communities. Beyond their spiritual function, these spaces often act as vital lifelines for food, shelter, and even legal advice.
Absolutely. But it's also important to acknowledge the counter-arguments. Some conservative religious groups support the DHS policy, arguing that legal violations shouldn't be shielded by where they occur. Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel made it clear, saying fugitives or criminals are not immune from the law merely because they enter a place of worship.
That viewpoint drives home just how nuanced this debate is. At its core, it's about balancing security concerns with religious liberty and community trust. Judge Chuang's decision certainly brings those tensions into focus, even if it's just one chapter in a broader legal and political story.
Well said, Andrew. This case is evolving, and we'll be keeping a close eye on any appeals or related developments. For now, Judge Chuang's ruling offers a temporary reprieve for a segment of faith-based communities impacted by immigration policies.
It's definitely an issue with national implications. Thanks for breaking it all down with me, Olivia. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in.
As always, for more immigration updates and in-depth analysis, visit us at visaverge.com. Take care.